Greetings, how you guys doing today? My name is Lockin. I'm going to presume that most of the people watching this video likely don't know who I am or that familiar with me. I'm just going to give a quick introduction on who I am, and then we'll get into what I actually want to talk about in the video. My name is Harrison, or as I go on by screen, Lockin. I was at one point an amateur shoutcaster with Compete League for League of Legends. I was briefly a professional analyst for a few League of Legends teams. More recently, what I've been doing is I've been playing Hearthstone for about 2 years, and I've hit Legend 23 of the past 24 months. And recently, about 3 weeks ago, I recently started into Gwent, where I've peaked at about 4.2k. And I wanted to get in today on the video that I want to talk about at hand because I've seen it a lot, this debate of Hearthstone versus Gwent, and I see it mentioned all the time. Honestly, just play Gwent. Gwent feels incredibly different from the other games. Gwent feels like a whole new game, and I wanted to explain why Gwent feels so different, and I want to do a multi-part video series on why Gwent feels so different, but why that doesn't necessarily mean it's better, it's just different. I wanted to do a bit of a pros and cons thing for Gwent, because right now I'm having a lot more fun with Gwent than I am Hearthstone. But I have my concerns about Gwent, so this is why I wanted to do the video series, and I wanted to hopefully maybe shed a little bit of light on why people are feeling the way they are. So the first thing that I just wanted to bring up, and this is fairly obvious, but I don't see it mentioned a lot, is Gwent has a completely new card game design. It's really the only card game of its nature that doesn't really have a traditional, health or face, and it doesn't even really have mana. It's just all about board, and you play one card around, or one card a turn, unless that card triggers something else that happens on the turn, but you're still mostly only playing one card from hand. The only example that, or not the only, but one of the few examples I can give you is Elven Mercenary, the 2-power Scoia'tael unit. You play it, and then you play a Bronze Special card from your deck, but you still only play the one card from your hand. I mean, there's a little bit of wiggle room on that, but for the most part, it's pretty consistent. And that's very different from other card games like Magic the Gathering, Hearthstone, even, Elder Scrolls Online games like that. The reason being that Hearthstone and most other traditional card games we see today are based incredibly largely on games like Magic the Gathering. One of the grandfathers of all card games, incredibly successful, and because of it, it's part of the reason why all the games are based the way they are. And Gwent did something completely different, and they went with rounds and power and not interacting with the health bar as much, just board total rather than anything like that. Gwent is incredibly different because of this, just inherently. It's just incredibly refreshing because it's never really been explored before on this level of popularity. This is really why that unless you've played anything like this, Gwent is incredibly different. And if you have, there's no way it's been to the renown or the just widespread, presence that Gwent has just because of CD Projekt Red and the popularity of The Witcher. The only real thing that Gwent and Hearthstone have in common is that they're card games, and the only thing that they really have in common is that you play cards, and that's not exactly the greatest, connection. That would be like saying that Triss and Yennefer are the same people because they're both sorceresses and they both slept with Geralt. The other thing I wanted to talk about too, and this is my second point that makes Gwent feel so much different and to a lot of people feel so much better. Gwent has admittedly, in my opinion, the greatest free-to-play system of any card game I've ever seen or heard of, or played myself. And it's actually mind-blowing how incredibly free-to-play friendly the game is. So I went ahead and just did a little bit of very primitive math, nothing all that deep. But basically, you have the ability to earn a keg for simply playing 4 games a day if you have a 50% win rate. You play 4 games a day, keg, every time. That's consistent. From my experience, my Gwent games are about 8 to 12 minutes roughly, so I just averaged that out to be 10, and basically I can earn a keg a day for just playing for 40 minutes. Now obviously I play Gwent for a lot longer than 40 minutes a day, as do a lot of people, but the bare minimum is you can play 40 minutes and get a keg a day, and that is actually crazy when you compare that to what Hearthstone does. The only Hearthstone quest that will give you a pack, which is the equivalent of a keg for those who aren't familiar, for completing it is win 7 games and for the 100 gold. And for that, you need to have 14 games played, roughly, if we assume the average 50% rate that games try to keep you at. And part of the reason is because Gwent has rounds and you can win one round but not win the game. But either way, 14 games played is going to take you about 2 hours to complete. I mean, and then that would be barring that you're playing anything like Token Druid or Pirate Warrior, but it's still going to take you over an hour. I mean, an hour and 10 minutes is the minimum, I would say, for 14 games played. Just due to queue times, load screens, mulligans, your opponent may rope, you may rope a little bit, and there's no way it's going to take you under an hour and 10 minutes, even if you're playing Pirate Warrior or Token Druid, inherently fast decks that try to win by turns 6 and 7. It's still a very long time. The other point is, too, that this quest is incredibly rare to actually get, and it's the only quest of this nature that lines up with anything that Gwent's doing. The average quest value is anywhere between 50 to 60 gold, and it's still going to take you like 10 games to finish. Again, going to take you to finish these 10 games probably an hour to an hour and a half, which is a significant amount longer than a player would have to put into Gwent, and you earn half a pack. So in Hearthstone on average, you need to play 2 days of 3 hours to get 1 keg, whereas in Gwent, if you played for 2 days over 3 hours, you would likely earn yourself about 4.5 kegs. The reason being that even though in Gwent you have your daily rewards just for playing like a certain amount, there's also increments. And these increments are far easier to hit than they are in Hearthstone. In Hearthstone, you have to win 3 games. It's not even just playing 3 games. The incredible thing that people have to understand about Gwent is you can complete these somewhat, even if you don't win, because you're still pretty likely to win 1 round. You can actually complete these without any sort of problem, purely based on just playing and just winning around. You don't even have to win. You just have to win 1 of the rounds, and you can get it. Whereas in Hearthstone, you need to play about 6 games roughly to get 10 gold, a tenth of a pack, which in Gwent, or on average, you're going to get probably every 2 to 4 rounds of winning, just depending on what increment you're in. Because in Gwent, every 2, 4, or 8 rounds that you win, depending on which reward tier that you're at, because there are different tiers, you'll earn either 15 scraps, and that's the equivalent of dust in Hearthstone, 15 ore, which is the equivalent of gold in Hearthstone. You can actually earn just a miscellaneous bronze or common card, or you can earn 15 powder. There isn't exactly a Hearthstone synonym for this one. Gwent just straight up has Hearthstone beat on this, because in Hearthstone you also have to use dust, whereas in Gwent you can actually use powder. So instead, here's just a picture of Binboard laughing. Always a good one. Anyways, yeah, at these 2, 4, and 8 round increments, you can actually just earn more ore. So over 3 hours of playing, you'll earn the 100 ore from your first increment. You'll earn the 75 for sure from the next, and then you're going to hit about 6, 8 increments and get another 50 or 40 scraps, roughly things like that. And now you've earned all this stuff. The Gwent is just incredibly outpacing Hearthstone. And then if you do something like me, where I actually spend anywhere from 3 to 5, sometimes even 6, occasionally, when I'm not doing other things, I spent 10 hours on the game before and maxed out the rewards tier and just earned a crazy amount, like almost enough cards in just scraps and ore just to craft a legendary. Like, I could just put that much hours into the game and just craft a legendary, which is insane to say when you think about how smart you have to be with your dust on Hearthstone. Gwent's free-to-play system is so incredibly ahead of every other card game I've played, and just Hearthstone in general, that I sometimes even have to ask myself, how long can this be maintained? How long will this go before CD Projekt Red actually has to tune it down a little bit, maybe? Maybe I'm just wrong and they're making crazy amounts of money, but to me it just seems like as a free-to-play player, you would pretty much never need to spend money on kegs as long as you don't mind only being able to run 1 or 2 decks at a time for the first bit, and then after a while you'll slowly get more and more decks, but as long as you're content just running 1 or 2 decks for a while, you can mass scraps and ore pretty easily just by playing. At one point I spent $40 and just bought a bunch of kegs just because I'd spent so much money in Hearthstone that to have that many cards in Gwent for free, I felt obligated to help CD Projekt Red out and give them some money. Because even dating back to the free DLC they dropped for Witcher 3 at the time, just to now on their game, their generosity has blown my mind, and I felt like I just wanted to support them, and I just wanted to support this sort of business model. But I wonder, how long can this go? Are players gonna always want to buy a lot of kegs? on each expansion instantly, or are they going to be content to wait and just spend, the scraps that they have saved up to get all the important legendaries, and then they'll just get the rest of the commons and epics and stuff over time? Do you need to buy packs when you can just, or kegs, when you can just stock up like this? But I don't have their numbers. I mean, and I'm sure that they have people that are qualified to do that, and they know that they can continue this, or they would have said something about it by now. It's just honestly amazing how free-to-play friendly Gwent is compared to every other game out there, and that's one of the reasons I think Gwent feels so refreshing to so many players. But that's not to say that Gwent is just the end-all, be-all of card games, because one of the things that I want to talk about too is Gwent doesn't have Hearthstone beat in all regards, or even just all card games. The thing I worry about is the longevity of the game. Is one of the things I'm a little concerned about, is in how long can they keep making cards and expansions? How long can they keep going? How long are they going to have new ideas before the game begins to get stale? The best example I can give for you is the multiple amounts of Geralts in the game, or the fact that in the new the card leaks that we've seen, Vesemir and these Witcher reworks are not inherently new characters. They may be new cards, but from what we can tell, when you play them, you bring them out from your deck, just like the old Witchers. I'm not really sure where this is going long term, or if CD Projekt Red really has a plan for the longevity of this game, or if they're just going to ride this out until they run out of ideas and then it's just going to kind of slowly go down. I'm not really sure. Hearthstone has this huge open world to work with that World of Warcraft has created and Blizzard has created, and they have all this endless new content to bring forth over and over again that they can just keep dropping, 3 expansions a year like they're doing now. Whereas in Gwent, I worry, are they going to be able to keep up the longevity of this game, or are we going to get to a point in the game at one point where there are 12 Geralts in the game, and I can't even just refer to him as Geralt, Geralt Igni, Geralt Ard. I have to say Geralt Ard Prone, Geralt Ard Kneeling. Like how, obviously that's not going to be a card, but you get what I'm saying, that how long can 2D Projekt keep going? These are one of the concerns I have, but I hope that they can keep doing it, because that's one of the few things that keeps Hearthstone going, is Hearthstone has inherently a problem with its meta pretty consistently every cycle, in that 1 or 2 decks clearly emerges and it dominates the game. And Blizzard is so anti-nerfing and buffing cards that it dominates the game, gets stale. Expansions are the only way to shake up the game. Gwent is proving that they're not afraid to, nerf and buff cards to keep the expansions rolling around and moving, which is cool. I mean, there's a lot of viable decks right now that you can play in Tier 1 and even high Tier 2 that you can easily take to a very high rank in the ladder, which is really awesome. And so I hope to see that continue, but I wonder long term, as the game goes and as players slowly get better, and as the game as a whole start to move into more refined deck lists and more just auto-include cards and just these more refined moments from top tier players, are we going to run into a problem where every single deck is the same? And that's kind of ties into my next point, is that Hearthstone does have a larger hero selection. And I know you can say Gwent has 3 heroes within each faction, so you could argue that they have 15 heroes. But to me, that's not the same as what Hearthstone does. The diversity in what each hero does within their classes is somewhat limited in some classes and very broad in others. So the best example I could give would be Skellig as the largest defender, with discard decks being the highest priority by a huge margin in that class. Whereas heroes like, for example, in Nilfgaard have pretty different game plans depending on what they do. The problem is, what happens when, even though these heroes allow different deck designs, what happens is, as the game and the lists get more refined, what happens when cards become auto-run across the table? For example, like a neutral card, like Ciri, for example, back before she was nerfed, she's just an auto-run. What happens when cards are like that? Or what happens when cards become one so good that they kind of become to define the central theme of all 3 heroes in one faction? CD Projekt Red has shown they're not afraid to nerf cards like that, which is good, but then we get another problem of, is that just what they do? Is that they just constantly nerf a card just because it's an auto run? Because that's not exactly the best system moving forward with either, where if a card becomes auto-run because it's good, does that mean it needs to be nerfed, or does that mean that there's not enough card diversity within class? Just nerfing a card doesn't necessarily address the problem, because it just means that down the line eventually another card's just going to be better and replace it somewhere. So This isn't a very large problem at the moment. I think most of the classes are in a decent spot. They all have several diverse decks. It's a lot of fun. The meta is really, really all over the place. The other day at 4.3k, I ran into a guy running like some really crazy like Camby deck that I've seen before. Is like people agree is tier 4, but he's playing at 4.3k. Really awesome stuff like that. I'm not really concerned about this right now, but long term, I definitely want to watch how they do this moving forward. The best example being Hearthstone didn't address this for a long time, and it eventually led to them having to create a Hall of Fame to put cards that became auto-includes or like theme deck defining just in a Hall of Fame set and moved them out just to get rid of them, just to fix this exact problem. So my hope is that CD Projekt Red will find a nice blend between just auto-nerfing cards and actually, rotating them and trying to keep class themes different. So that's kind of what the first part of the video I wanted to do. I have more stuff I want to do down the line, but for the time being, that's all I want to do right now. In my next video, I kind of want to discuss the fundamental flaws of the round versus the fundamental flaws of the mana system, and where CD Projekt Red has gone right and where they've gone wrong in that. And yeah, well, the biggest thing I want to talk about in the next video is carryover and what that means for the game moving forward. But for the time being, I just wanted to do this video. I just wanted to show you guys my thoughts on this for the time being and kind of introduce this little multi-part video series I wanted to do moving forward. So if you've managed to sit through all this, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Feel free to give me your thoughts in the comments. I'm usually pretty good about responding to people, and I'd love to actually hear what you guys think, if this is just me being the minority or if this is actually something other people agree with. So thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you till the next one.